Emily Fairchild's designer boots sank into the mud, and for the first time in her life, she had no idea how to get out. The sleek black SUV that had dropped her off disappeared down the dirt road, leaving her alone with her Louis Vuitton suitcase and a sinking feeling in her stomach. The farmhouse loomed before her, a weathered testament to years of hard work and perseverance. Emily wrinkled her nose at the pungent smell of manure and hay that permeated the air. This was a far cry from the penthouse parties and designer boutiques she was accustomed to. A stern-faced woman emerged from the house, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. Emily recognized her grandmother Agnes from the few childhood photos she'd seen. "Well, don't just stand there gawking," Agnes called out. "Get yourself up here before you sink any deeper." Emily struggled to lift her feet, the suction of the mud threatening to claim her expensive footwear. With each step, she felt her carefully crafted image of sophistication crumbling. "I can't believe Dad did this to me," Emily muttered, dragging her suitcase behind her. Agnes's eyes narrowed. "Your father did what needed to be done. It's high time you learned the value of hard work." Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket. She fumbled for it, desperate for a lifeline to her old world. "Dad, you can't be serious." Agnes plucked the phone from her grasp. "No phones until you've earned the privilege. Now follow me." Stunned, Emily trailed after her grandmother, the reality of her situation sinking in with each squelching step. The barn door creaked open, revealing a cavernous space filled with the pungent aroma of livestock and hay. Agnes thrust a pair of work gloves into Emily's manicured hands. "Your first task, clean out the stalls." Emily stared at the gloves, then at the mess before her. "You're joking, right? I don't do manual labor." Agnes's expression remained impassive. "Then I suppose you don't eat either. No work, no food. That's how things operate here." Emily's stomach growled traitorously. She hadn't eaten since the flight, and the thought of missing a meal was almost as unbearable as the task at hand. "Fine," she huffed, snatching the gloves. "But I'm not touching anything. Gross." A hint of amusement flickered in Agnes's eyes. "We'll see about that." As Agnes left, Emily surveyed the barn with growing dismay. She'd never even owned a pet, let alone cared for farm animals. The nearest she'd come to this kind of environment was a petting zoo at a charity event, and even then, she'd kept her distance. "Need a hand?" A voice called from behind her. Emily turned to see a woman in her 30s, dressed in well-worn jeans and a flannel shirt. Her kind eyes contrasted with the calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work. "I'm Martha," she said, offering a smile. "Agnes asked me to show you the ropes." Emily eyed Martha warily. "I don't suppose you'd consider doing this for me? I could make it worth your while." Martha chuckled. "That's not how things work around here, but I'll guide you through it." Over the next hour, Emily fumbled her way through the basics of mucking out stalls. Her designer clothes were soon streaked with dirt and worse, her perfectly manicured nails chipped and broken. "This is impossible," Emily groaned, leaning on her pitchfork. "How do you do this every day?" Martha shrugged. "It's just part of life here. You get used to it." "I don't want to get used to it," Emily muttered. "I want to go home." A new voice joined the conversation. "Hate to break it to you, Princess, but this is home now." Emily turned to see a teenage boy leaning against the barn door, a smirk playing on his lips. "David," Martha chided. "Be nice. Emily's new here." David rolled his eyes. "Yeah, I can see that. You might want to tell her those boots aren't exactly farm-friendly." Emily glared at him. "I didn't exactly pack for this adventure." "Adventure?" David scoffed. "Is that what you call being shipped off because Daddy got tired of your antics?" Emily's cheeks burned. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," David retorted. "Your type comes through here, sometimes. Rich kids thinking they can play farmer for a summer. But guess what? No one here cares about your problems." "David, that's enough," Martha said firmly. "Why don't you go help your father with the tractor?" As David stalked off, Emily felt a lump forming in her throat. She'd never felt so out of place, so utterly unprepared for what lay ahead. Martha placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Don't mind him. He's got a chip on his shoulder when it comes to city folk. Give it time. He'll come around." Emily nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She returned to her task, each scoop of manure feeling like a personal affront to everything she'd known. As the sun began to set, Agnes reappeared at the barn door. "That's enough for today. Get cleaned up for dinner." Emily stumbled out of the barn, her muscles aching in ways she'd never experienced. She caught sight of her reflection in a water trough and barely recognized herself. Her carefully styled hair was a mess, her face streaked with dirt. "There's a shower in the back of the house," Agnes said, her tone softening slightly. "I've left some clean clothes for you." Emily nodded gratefully, too exhausted to argue or complain. Later, as she sat at the dinner table in borrowed jeans and a flannel shirt, Emily felt like an imposter in her own skin. Agnes set down a plate of home-cooked food, the aroma making Emily's mouth water despite herself. "So," Agnes began, "your father tells me you've been making quite a name for yourself in the tabloids." Emily pushed her food around the plate. "It's not like that. They exaggerate everything." Agnes mused. "And I suppose crashing a Ferrari into a storefront was just an exaggeration too." Emily's fork clattered against her plate. "How did you?" "Your father and I may not be close, but we do talk," Agnes said, "especially when it comes to family matters." Emily felt a surge of anger. "So this is all just a punishment? Ship me off to the middle of nowhere to teach me a lesson?" Agnes's eyes hardened. "This isn't a punishment, Emily. It's an opportunity. An opportunity to learn what really matters in life. What, shoveling manure and living like it's the 1800s?" Emily scoffed. "No," Agnes replied calmly. "Learning the value of hard work, of community, of building something with your own two hands." Emily fell silent, the weight of her grandmother's words sinking in. She'd never built anything in her life, never worked for anything beyond her next social media post or designer purchase. As the meal concluded, Emily found herself wandering back to the barn. The quiet of the evening settled around her, broken only by the soft sounds of animals settling in for the night. She noticed a door she hadn't seen before, partially hidden behind some old equipment. Curiosity piqued. She pushed it open, revealing a small office space. Dust-covered ledgers and papers littered the desk. Emily's eyes widened as she began to leaf through them. Years of financial records, all pointing to one inescapable conclusion. The farm was in trouble. Bills piled high, income dwindling year after year. Emily's business acumen, honed through years of observing her father's dealings, kicked in. The farm was on the brink of collapse. A creaking floorboard made her spin around. Agnes stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I see you found my little secret," she said softly. Emily's mind raced. "Grandma, why didn't you say anything? This farm, it's barely staying afloat." Agnes sighed, suddenly looking every one of her years. "Pride, I suppose, and hope. I kept thinking things would turn around." Emily looked back at the ledgers, then at her grandmother. For the first time, she saw beyond the stern exterior to the weight Agnes carried. "Maybe." Emily hesitated, surprised by her own words. "Maybe I could help. I mean, I do know a thing or two about business." A ghost of a smile played on Agnes's lips. "Do you now? Well, we'll see about that." As Emily lay in bed that night, her muscles aching and her mind whirling, she realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about enduring her time here anymore. There was a challenge ahead, one that called to a part of her she'd never known existed. She drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with ledgers and fields of possibility, the city life she'd known fading like a distant memory. The rooster's crow pierced the pre-dawn silence, jolting Emily from her fitful sleep. She groaned, her muscles protesting as she rolled out of bed. The realization of the farm's dire financial situation weighed heavily on her mind, overshadowing her physical discomfort. Emily stumbled to the window, squinting at the misty fields. A figure moved through the haze, Agnes, already at work. Guilt gnawed at Emily's conscience. She'd come here, resenting her grandmother, only to discover the older woman was fighting to keep her livelihood afloat. Determined to make a difference, Emily dressed quickly and headed to the barn. She found Martha already there, preparing feed for the animals. "You're up early," Martha remarked, surprise evident in her voice. Emily grabbed a nearby pitchfork. "I want to help. Really help, not just go through the motions." Martha's eyebrows shot up, but she nodded approvingly. "Well, let's get to it then." As they worked side by side, Emily's mind raced with possibilities. "Martha, has anyone ever tried to modernize the farm? Use technology to increase efficiency or reach new markets." Martha paused, leaning on her rake. "Agnes isn't one for change. She's been doing things the same way for decades." Emily frowned. "But surely she sees that times are changing? The farm can't survive if it doesn't adapt." Before Martha could respond, a truck rumbled up the driveway. A man in his 50s, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the rural setting, stepped out. Martha's expression darkened. "That's Greg Thatcher. He's been after this land for years." Emily watched as Thatcher approached Agnes, who had emerged from the fields. Their conversation, though inaudible from this distance, appeared tense. "What does he want with the farm?" Emily asked. Martha sighed. "He owns most of the surrounding properties. Wants to turn the whole area into some sort of resort complex." Emily's eyes narrowed. She may not have known much about farming, but she understood business sharks all too well. As Thatcher drove away, Emily approached her grandmother. "Who was that?" Agnes's jaw was set, her eyes steely. "No one you need to concern yourself with." "Grandma, I know about the farm's financial troubles," Emily blurted out. "I want to help." Agnes turned, surprise flickering across her face before her usual stern expression returned. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Emily hesitated. I'm not sure yet, but I have experience with business and marketing. There must be something I can do." Agnes regarded her for a long moment. "Very well. You can start by fixing that fence in the south pasture. We can't afford to lose any more livestock." Emily's heart sank. This wasn't exactly what she had in mind, but she nodded, determined to prove herself. The day wore on, filled with backbreaking labor. Emily's hands, unused to such work, blistered and bled. Yet she persevered, driven by a newfound sense of purpose. As evening approached, David appeared at the edge of the field. "Need a hand?" Emily looked up, surprised by the offer. "I thought you didn't care about my problems." David shrugged. "Maybe I was too quick to judge. Besides, this isn't just your problem. It's all of ours." Together, they finished repairing the fence. As they worked, Emily shared her ideas for modernizing the farm. David listened intently. That's not half bad, but good luck convincing Agnes to change anything." "I have to try," Emily insisted. "This farm is too important to let it fail." As they walked back to the farmhouse, Emily noticed something odd. The barn door, which she distinctly remembered closing earlier, stood ajar. "Did you leave that open?" she asked David. He shook his head, frowning. "No, and Agnes is always careful about locking up." They approached cautiously. Inside, papers were strewn across the floor, drawers left open. "Someone's been through here," David muttered. Emily's mind raced. The financial records she discovered. Had someone been looking for them? A noise outside made them both jump. David peered out. There's a truck parked just beyond the property line. Looks like one of Thatcher's. Emily's suspicion grew. "We need to tell Agnes." But when they informed Agnes of their discovery, she dismissed their concerns. "Probably just the wind. No need to go stirring up trouble." Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The next day, she decided to do some digging of her own. While Agnes and Martha were occupied with the morning chores, Emily slipped into the study. She rifled through drawers and files, searching for anything that might shed light on the farm situation. Hidden beneath a stack of old newspapers, she found a letter. As she read, her eyes widened. It was from her father, Jason, dated several years back. He had co-signed a loan for the farm, effectively tying his finances to Agnes's. Emily's mind reeled. Why had her father never mentioned this? And why send her here if he knew about the farm's troubles? Lost in thought, she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until it was too late. What do you think you're doing? Agnes's voice was sharp as a whip. Emily spun around, the letter clutched in her hand. I was just trying to understand what's going on. Agnes's eyes fell on the letter, and her expression softened slightly. I see you found out about your father's involvement. Why didn't you tell me? Emily demanded. It wasn't my place. Agnes replied. Your father made his choices, just as I've made mine. Emily's frustration boiled over. But don't you see, we could lose everything if we don't do something. Agnes's eyes flashed. You think I don't know that? I've poured my life into this farm. It's not just land and animals. It's my home, my legacy. For the first time, Emily saw the vulnerability behind her grandmother's tough exterior. Then let me help. For real this time. Agnes studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. All right, what did you have in mind? Over the next few days, Emily threw herself into revitalizing the farm. She set up social media accounts, showcasing the farm's organic produce and ethically raised livestock. She reached out to local restaurants and markets, arranging deals for fresh, locally sourced ingredients. But for every step forward, there seemed to be 2 steps back. Crops withered in an unexpected dry spell. Animals fell ill. And always, there was Thatcher, lurking on the periphery, waiting for them to fail. One evening, as Emily was updating the farm's new website, a knock at the door interrupted her work. She opened it to find Thatcher standing there, a false smile plastered on his face. Miss Fairchild, I presume? I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Greg Thatcher. Emily's guard immediately went up. Mr. Thatcher, what can I do for you? He stepped inside uninvited. I couldn't help but notice the changes you've been making around here. Quite impressive for someone so new to the farming life. Emily's eyes narrowed. Is there a point to this visit? Thatcher's smile faded. I'll be blunt. This farm is a lost cause. Your grandmother is too stubborn to see it, but you're a smart girl. You must realize it's only a matter of time before you'll have to sell. We're doing just fine, thank you, Emily retorted, her voice icy. Thatcher's expression hardened. Listen carefully. I've invested too much time and money in this area to let one stubborn old woman and her city slicker granddaughter stand in my way. One way or another, this land will be mine. Emily stood her ground. Is that a threat, Mr. Thatcher? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Consider it a friendly warning. Good evening, Miss Fairchild. As Thatcher's car disappeared down the driveway, Emily's mind raced. She needed to act fast if they were going to save the farm. The next morning, she cornered Agnes in the kitchen. Grandma, we need to talk about the farm's finances. On the site. Emily, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but… No, listen, Emily interrupted. I've been going over the books and I think I found something. There's an error in the accounting from a few years back. If we can correct it, we might be able to qualify for a better loan, maybe even some grants for sustainable farming. Agnes blinked, surprised. How did you figure that out? Emily smiled wryly. Turns out all those business classes Dad made me take weren't a total waste. As they pored over the financial records together, Emily felt a newfound connection with her grandmother. For the first time, they were working as a team. But as they delved deeper into the farm's history, Emily uncovered something that made her blood run cold. Her father's involvement with the farm went beyond co-signing a loan. There were records of payments to Thatcher dating back months. Emily's world tilted on its axis. Had her father been working with Thatcher all along? Was this whole lesson in humility just a cover for something more sinister? As the sun set on another grueling day of farm work, Emily stood at the edge of the fields, her phone in hand. She stared at her father's number, her finger hovering over the call button. It was time for answers, no matter how painful they might be. Emily's finger hovered over the call button, her heart pounding. The weight of her discovery pressed down on her like a physical force. She took a deep breath and pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before Jason's voice filled her ear. "Emily, is everything all right? Dad, we need to talk." Emily's voice was steely, a far cry from the whining tone she'd used in their previous conversations. Jason chuckled. "Finally had enough of farm life. Ready to come home?" "No, Dad. I'm staying, but I need answers. Why did you really send me here?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I told you, Emily. It was time you learned." "Cut the crap, Dad," Emily interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "I know about the loan you co-signed. I know about the payments to Thatcher. What's really going on?" The silence that followed was deafening. When Jason finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. "Emily, this is a complicated business matter. It's not something you need to concern yourself with." "It became my concern the moment you shipped me off to this farm," Emily retorted. "Grandma's about to lose everything, and you're working with a man trying to take it from her? How could you?" "You don't understand the bigger picture," Jason said, his tone hardening. "Sometimes in business, you have to make tough decisions for the greater good." Emily's grip on the phone tightened. "The greater good? Whose greater good, Dad? Yours. Thatcher's." "Emily, listen to me." "No, you listen." Emily cut him off. "I'm not leaving. I'm going to fight for this farm, with or without your help." She ended the call, her hands shaking. The enormity of what she'd just done hit her. She'd stood up to her father, something she'd never dared to do before. As she turned back toward the farmhouse, she saw Agnes standing on the porch, watching her. The older woman's face was unreadable in the fading light. "Everything all right?" Agnes asked as Emily approached. Emily nodded, forcing a smile. "Just checking in with Dad. Nothing to worry about." Agnes's eyes narrowed, but she didn't press the issue. "Well, come on inside. We've got an early start tomorrow." The next morning dawned bright and clear. Emily threw herself into her work with renewed vigor, determined to prove to herself and everyone else that she was committed to saving the farm. As she and David worked on repairing a broken tractor, Martha approached with a worried expression. "Emily, Agnes wants to see you in the house. There's someone here to see you both." Emily's stomach dropped. She exchanged a glance with David before heading towards a farmhouse, wiping her grease-stained hands on her jeans. As she entered the living room, she froze. Sitting across from Agnes was Greg Thatcher, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Ah, Miss Fairchild," Thatcher greeted her. "So good of you to join us. I was just discussing a very interesting proposition with your grandmother." Emily's eyes darted to Agnes, who sat rigid in her chair, her face a mask of stone. "What kind of proposition?" Emily asked, her voice tight. Thatcher's smile widened. "Well, given the farm's financial difficulties, I've made a very generous offer to buy the property. It would solve all of Agnes's problems in one fell swoop." Emily's mind raced. She knew they were in trouble, but she hadn't realized things had gotten this desperate. "We're not selling," Emily stated firmly. Thatcher raised an eyebrow. "I don't believe that's your decision to make, my dear Agnes." All eyes turned to the older woman. Agnes looked between Emily and Thatcher, her expression unreadable. "I need time to think," Agnes said finally. Thatcher nodded, standing. "Of course, but don't take too long. My offer won't be on the table forever." As he left, Emily turned to her grandmother. "You can't seriously be considering this." Agnes sighed heavily. "Emily, you don't understand. This farm has been struggling for years. Maybe it's time to face facts." "No," Emily insisted. "We can turn this around. I have ideas, plans. Just give me a chance to make them work." Agnes studied her granddaughter for a long moment. "All right," she said finally. "You have 1 month. If you can't make significant progress by then, we'll have to seriously consider Thatcher's offer." Emily nodded, determination burning in her eyes. "I won't let you down." Over the next few weeks, Emily threw herself into revitalizing the farm. She set up social media accounts, showcasing their organic produce and ethically raised livestock. She reached out to local restaurants and markets, arranging deals for fresh, locally sourced ingredients. Her efforts began to pay off. A popular farm-to-table restaurant in the nearby town agreed to feature their produce. A local community market invested in their organic line, providing a much-needed influx of cash. But for every step forward, there seemed to be 2 steps back. A sudden hailstorm damaged a significant portion of their crops. One of their prized dairy cows fell ill, requiring expensive veterinary care. Through it all, Emily refused to give up. She worked from sunrise to well past sunset, her hands calloused and her skin tanned from long days in the fields. One evening, as she was updating the farm's new website, her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Town hall meeting tomorrow night. Thatcher's on the agenda. You need to be there." Emily's heart raced. She knew this could be their chance to rally community support against Thatcher's plans. The next night, Emily and David arrived at the town hall to find it packed. Thatcher stood at the front, his polished appearance a stark contrast to the sea of weathered faces and work-worn hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thatcher began, his voice smooth as oil, "I stand before you today with a vision for our community, a vision of progress, of economic growth, of a brighter future for all of us." Emily listened as Thatcher outlined his plans for a sprawling resort complex that would put their little town on the map. Her blood boiled as she heard him describe how the complex would create jobs and bring in tourists, conveniently glossing over the fact that it would destroy generations of family farms in the process. As Thatcher finished his speech to polite applause, Emily stood. "Mr. Thatcher," she called out, her voice ringing clear through the hall. "You talk about progress and economic growth, but at what cost?" All eyes turned to her as she made her way to the front of the room. "I may be new here," Emily continued, "but in the short time I've been working on my grandmother's farm, I've learned something valuable. This land, these farms, they're not just businesses. They're a way of life. They're our heritage, our legacy." She turned to face the crowd. What Mr. Thatcher is proposing would destroy that legacy. Yes, it might bring in some jobs and some tourist dollars. But at what cost? The loss of our independence. The destruction of land that's been in our families for generations. Emily's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "We don't need a resort complex to bring prosperity to our community. We have everything we need right here. Rich soil, hard-working people, and a connection to the land that money can't buy." She outlined her vision, a network of small, family-owned farms working together to create a sustainable, thriving local economy. As she spoke, she saw heads nodding, faces lighting up with hope and possibility. Thatcher, his face red with anger, stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. You're just a child playing at being a farmer. What do you know about running a business?" Emily stood her ground. "I may be young, Mr. Thatcher, but I know enough to see through your schemes. You don't care about this community. You only care about lining your own pockets." Thatcher's eyes narrowed. He took a menacing step towards Emily, but David quickly moved to stand beside her. "Back off, Thatcher," David growled. The tension in the room was palpable. For a moment, it seemed like things might turn violent. But then, a voice from the back of the room called out, "I say we give the girl a chance." Another voice joined in. "Yeah, I'd rather buy my produce from Emily than some fancy resort any day." Soon, the room was filled with voices of support. Emily felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could win this fight. As the meeting broke up, Emily found herself surrounded by community members offering support and encouragement. She caught sight of Agnes standing at the back of the room, a proud smile on her face. But as Emily made her way towards her grandmother, she froze. Standing next to Agnes, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, was her father, Jason. Their eyes met across the crowded room. In that moment, Emily realized that the real battle was just beginning. She had won over the town, but could she win over her own father? As Jason began to make his way towards her, Emily steeled herself for the confrontation to come. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't the same girl who had arrived at the farm all those weeks ago. She was stronger now, more determined, and ready to fight for what she believed in. The future of the farm, and perhaps of the entire community, hung in the balance. And Emily was ready to face it head-on. Emily's heart pounded as Jason approached, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. The crowded town hall faded into background noise as father and daughter locked eyes. "What are you doing here?" Emily's voice trembled despite her efforts to keep it steady. Jason's jaw clenched. "I could ask you the same thing. That little speech of yours was the truth." Emily cut him off. "Something you seem to have forgotten about." Agnes stepped between them, her weathered hands raised. "This isn't the place. Let's take this back to the farm." The ride home was thick with tension. Emily's mind raced, piecing together the betrayal she'd uncovered. As they pulled up to the farmhouse, she couldn't hold back any longer. "How could you work with Thatcher? Against your own mother?" Jason's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "It's not that simple, Emily. The farm's been failing for years. I was trying to salvage what I could. By destroying everything Grandma's worked for?" Emily's voice cracked. "Everything Mom dreamed of." Jason's head snapped towards her, shock etched across his face. "How do you know about that?" Agnes sighed heavily. "I told her, Jason. It was time she knew." They filed into the kitchen, the air heavy with unspoken words. Martha and David, sensing the tension, excused themselves, leaving the Fairchilds alone. Emily paced the worn linoleum floor. "I want the truth. All of it. Now." Jason slumped into a chair, suddenly looking older than his years. "Your mother. She loved this place. Saw potential in it that Agnes and I never did. She had all these plans, dreams of turning it into something special. So why didn't you help her?" Emily demanded. "Because I was young and stupid." Jason's voice was barely above a whisper. "I thought I knew better. Thought the real money was in the city. We argued about it right up until." The unspoken tragedy hung in the air. Emily's mother had died in a car accident when Emily was just a toddler. After she was gone, I threw myself into my work, built my empire, but I never forgot this place. It was all I had left of her. Emily's anger flared. "So you decided to destroy it?" "No." Jason stood abruptly. "I was trying to save it. Thatcher's offer. It would have allowed me to buy the land to preserve it." "As what? A monument to your guilt?" Emily's words cut deep. "This farm isn't just land, Dad. It's alive. It's a legacy. Mom's legacy." The kitchen fell silent, save for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Agnes, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "Jason, it's time to let go. Emily's right. This farm isn't just about us anymore." Jason's shoulders sagged in defeat. "What do you want me to do?" Emily straightened, her mind racing. "Cut ties with Thatcher. Completely. And then, help me save this place. For real this time." Over the next few days, Emily threw herself into her most ambitious plan yet. She reached out to every contact she'd made, calling in favors and making impassioned pleas. Jason, true to his word, severed all ties with Thatcher and used his business acumen to support Emily's efforts. The breakthrough came on a crisp autumn morning. Emily burst into the barn where Agnes and Martha were tending to the animals. "I did it." She waved a stack of papers triumphantly. "Organic Valley wants to partner with us. They're offering a contract to be one of their primary suppliers in the region." Agnes's eyes widened. "Organic Valley, the national distributor." Emily nodded, breathless with excitement. "They love our story, our commitment to sustainable farming. This could change everything." As word spread, the community rallied around them. Neighbors offered to help expand their operations. Local businesses pledged to stock their products. The farm buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose and hope. But Thatcher wasn't going down without a fight. He showed up at the farm one evening, his face twisted with rage. "You think you've won?" He snarled at Emily. "This isn't over. I'll bury you in lawsuits. I'll make sure no one in this county will do business with you." Emily stood her ground, flanked by Agnes and Jason. "Go ahead and try, Mr. Thatcher. But you're not just fighting us anymore. You're fighting an entire community." As if on cue, trucks began pulling up the driveway. Farmers, shopkeepers, families, all coming to show their support. Thatcher's face paled as he realized he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the threat rang hollow as he retreated to his car. In the weeks that followed, the farm underwent a transformation. New equipment arrived, fields were expanded, and a small processing facility was built to handle their increased production. Emily worked tirelessly, her designer clothes long since replaced by sturdy work wear, her manicured nails now perpetually ringed with dirt. One evening, as the sun set over the newly thriving fields, Jason found Emily sitting on the porch steps. "Your mother will be proud of you," he said softly, joining her. Emily looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Tell me about her dreams for this place." Jason smiled, a bittersweet expression crossing his face. "She used to say that this land had a heartbeat, that if we listened closely enough, it would tell us exactly what it needed to thrive." Emily nodded, understanding washing over her. "I think I can hear it now." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "I owe you an apology," Jason said finally. "I thought I was teaching you a lesson by sending you here. Instead, you taught me one." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what's that?" "That true success isn't measured in dollars and cents. It's measured in the lives you touch, the legacy you leave behind." Emily stood, brushing off her jeans. "Well, we've got a pretty good start on that legacy, but there's still work to do." As they walked back to the house, Agnes called out from the kitchen. "Emily, there's someone on the phone for you. Says they're from that organic foods magazine." Emily's eyes lit up. She'd been hoping for this call. As she reached for the phone, she caught sight of her reflection in the window. Gone was the spoiled city girl who had arrived months ago. In her place stood a confident, capable woman ready to take on the world. "This is Emily Fairchild," she said into the receiver, her voice strong and clear. "How can I help you?" Jason watched his daughter, a mixture of pride and awe on his face. Agnes joined him, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "She's something special, isn't she?" Agnes murmured. Jason nodded. "She certainly is. I just wish I'd seen it sooner." As Emily excitedly discussed plans for a feature article on the farm, Jason's phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. Urgent meeting requested by board. Concerns about recent company direction. Jason glanced at the message, then back at Emily. Without hesitation, he turned off the phone and slipped it into his pocket. "Everything okay?" Agnes asked. Jason smiled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "Never better. I'm exactly where I need to be." The next morning dawned bright and clear. Emily stood at the edge of the fields, breathing in the crisp air. The farm stretched out before her, alive with possibility. David joined her, a basket of fresh eggs in his arms. "Ready for another day of saving the world, Fairchild?" Emily laughed, the sound carrying across the fields. "One farm at a time, Harper. One farm at a time." As they walked back to the farmhouse, Emily's phone chimed. A notification from their online store. Another large order had come in overnight. "You know," Emily mused, "a few months ago, I thought my life was over when Dad sent me here. Turns out, it was just beginning." David nudged her shoulder. "Yeah, well, don't let it go to your head. You've still got a lot to learn about actually running this place." Emily grinned. "Good thing I've got you to teach me then." Inside, Agnes and Martha were preparing breakfast, while Jason pored over some paperwork at the table. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and the sounds of easy conversation. Emily paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. This mismatched group of people had become more than just co-workers or even friends. They were family. "Everything okay?" Jason asked, noticing her hesitation. Emily nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "Yeah, everything's perfect." As she joined them at the table, passing plates and sharing stories of yesterday's triumphs and today's challenges, Emily felt a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. Later that day, as Emily worked on updating their business plan, Jason knocked on the office door. "Got a minute?" he asked, an odd expression on his face. Emily nodded, setting aside her work. "What's up?" Jason took a deep breath. "There's something I need to show you." He led her to the old barn, to a corner she'd never paid much attention to before. With a grunt, he moved aside a heavy crate, revealing a small door. "Your mother's secret place," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't bring myself to open after, but I think it's time." With trembling hands, he opened the door. Inside was a small room, filled with notebooks, sketches, and a dusty old computer. "This was where she planned it all," Jason said softly. "Her vision for the farm, for the future." Emily stepped inside, her fingers trailing over the papers. Her mother's handwriting, her ideas, her dreams, all preserved in this hidden sanctuary. As Emily explored, Jason watched from the doorway, tears in his eyes. "You know, when I sent you here, I thought I was punishing you, teaching you a lesson. But the truth is I was terrified." Emily looked up, surprised. "Terrified? Of what?" "Of losing you," Jason admitted. "You were so much like her, passionate, determined, full of dreams. I thought if I could control your path, keep you in the world I understood, I could keep you safe." Emily's eyes softened. "Oh, Dad." "But I was wrong," Jason continued. "By trying to protect you, I almost destroyed the very thing that makes you special. Your mother would have seen it right away. She always did have better instincts than me." Emily crossed the room, wrapping her arms around her father. "She had good instincts about you too, you know. She chose you, after all." As they embraced, surrounded by the echoes of a dream long deferred but never forgotten, Emily felt the last pieces of her new life falling into place. "Come on," she said, wiping away a tear. "We've got work to do. Mom's vision for this place. It's time to make it a reality." Hand in hand, father and daughter walked out of the barn and into the sunlight. The field stretched out before them, a canvas of possibilities waiting to be painted. Emily took a deep breath, savoring the earthy scent of the farm, her legacy. "You know, Dad," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Turns out I didn't need your millions to become one myself." Jason laughed, a full, hearty sound that echoed across the fields. "No, you certainly didn't. You've built something far more valuable than I ever could." As they walked towards a farmhouse, where Agnes, Martha, and David were waiting, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. This was where she belonged. This was her true home. The spoiled city girl was gone, replaced by a woman who understood the value of hard work, the importance of community, and the power of staying true to one's dreams. Emily Fairchild had come home, not just to a farm, but to herself. And the adventure was only just beginning.